and indeed, good morning, everyone. Let's get right into what we're going to be showing today. Agenda is pretty succinct and direct. It's all about agents and all about agents within Business Central today. So we'll do a very, very quick overview of what's available in general in Business Central from an agent's perspective. And then we'll get into some of the specifics about the pre-built agents, specifically the payables and the sales order agent. And then finally, some very recent releases from Microsoft. We will dig into the agent designer. So this isn't a general AI discussion. This is very, very specifically an agentic discussion related to Business Central. So hopefully everyone is coming to this session understanding in general terms the rough difference between Copilot, overall AI, and what agents do. I'll do a really, really quick recap on sort of how we would define an agent, but it in effect is a component of artificial intelligence that operates and processes a very, very specific business process. So you could almost give it a role within the org chart. It would be just a very, very distinct and confined role to the specific business process that it is trying to optimize or enhance. Within Business Central, we've got two different ways that we deliver agents to customers at the end of the day. One is the pre-built agents that we just mentioned, the sales order agent and the payables agent. And by the way, Microsoft is coming out with more agents that will be pre-built for the general public to use. And then the other side of that is, of course, the build your own agent. In the past, you were always able to build your own agent, but you had to do so in Copilot Studio or the much more, how would we say, development-heavy applications that lived outside of Business Central. So the concept of bringing that agent build or agent designer inside of Business Central is rather compelling, but we'll save that for a little bit later in the presentation. So specifically, the agents within Business Central, sales order agent and payables agent, we'll dig into these in a couple of minutes in a relatively decent amount of detail. But largely, that sales order agent is there to communicate directly with those customers, try to interpret or understand what the customer is asking for, and then send back quotes to customers as well as create sales orders within Business Central. On the payables agent side, it effectively is receiving invoices that are emailed to it from vendors. It captures by reading that invoice the information on screen, and then it registers those invoices within Business Central for ultimately posting into the subledger. So let's dig in a little bit of detail. Specifically, we'll start with the payables agent. So when they started kind of looking at what problems they could solve with agentic AI, the payables challenges kind of came up more than other business processes. So they started with wanting to solve problems like time consumption in and around entering invoices, incorrect data being not maliciously obviously, but just re-entry of information always has a risk of being incorrectly entered. The compliance or the predictability with which invoices get entered into the system so that the process is always compliant. And then, of course, the impact of any of those not being correct has ultimately an impact on financial data, which the rest of the business often uses to make important business decisions. And so we see the payables agent really trying to solve some of those problems in regards to very consistently and quickly correcting or correctly entering those invoices, as well as being date sensitive so that you can do your payables aging in the most appropriate way, being compliant with all of the rules that the organization has set up in terms of how invoices are collected and processed within the system, and then even being able to properly take an invoice and match that with any pre-existing purchase orders to ensure that inventory and predicted inventory are all lined up to reality. How it works, like I said, Brendan will kind of walk through this in a little bit of a live demonstration. Some OCR capabilities, optical character recognition capabilities, in order to read the invoice, and it will create a draft document in Business Central using what it's read and matching to data that's in Business Central. It will either match with a vendor or create a vendor if that's how you want it to operate. We have some recommendations on that front that we'll get to, and then it really only processes the information within the role that it's been given. So it will have its own permissions and its own profile, and anything that is outside of that would effectively initiate an interaction with a human to kind of resolve. It will process and error check itself in order to make sure that the invoice is entered correctly. And once it's done all of that work, it brings an individual into the loop in order to validate the information that it has entered, or it will maybe even ask a question of the human if it doesn't know how to process something. After that is ultimately reviewed, we basically would send that to a posted vendor invoice. And I think at that point, Brennan, I've probably talked enough. I think you can take it away and show everybody how this payables agent works, which, by the way, I think was only released fairly recently over the last month or so. So it's been previewed for a while, but
generally available over the last
yeah.
30 days for sure. Okay, let me share my screen. Thank you, Aaron. Hello, everyone. Okay, so I'm going to trigger this payables agent, the one that I have in my demo environment. And I'll mention there's a couple of ways you can do this. So I have a dedicated email address for my payables agent. We can use it internally. So your finance department can send invoices to be processed. So that would be an internal use. Or you can send it to select vendors for them to send directly their invoices to the agent, or both. I'm doing this internally, let's say, and it's an invoice for yearly licenses. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to send this out. It's going to take a couple of minutes, but there's a few things I can talk about before we actually receive it. Here's the different agents I have in my demo environment. If I hover over the payables agent, right away it's showing the KPIs. So some of what Aaron was talking about is actually determining how much time I saved by using the payables agent to actually process. In this case, 3 invoices. I only had it on for a little while. Received 7 emails and saved time on the emails by 21 minutes. You don't even have to monitor these emails for the payables agent. Now, what I do want to do is just quickly show and reiterate what Aaron was talking about in terms of some of the light setup for the agent. And I'll use the example of the payables agent, but this goes across all agents in Business Central. You set them up essentially the same as you set up a user. You set them up with, as Aaron had mentioned, its own profile or UI that it has access to, and a set of permissions so that it only has access to do what it needs to do for its work, and it doesn't have access to anything beyond what's available to them based on these permissions. And then, of course, the user access. So you'd want maybe for a payables agent to have 2 or 3 people in your finance department to have access, maybe dedicate one of them to configure the system, which is very light configuration. And even when we look at the tasks that it does over time, everything's logged, right down to the consumption of Copilot credits, which Aaron might talk about later on. It's very specific for the payables agent. You always know what the consumption is. So I just clicked on it. It's really pretty straightforward. It's 50 Copilot credits per document processed, plus another 5 Copilot credits per line. And a Copilot credit is 1 cent US this time. Okay, let's kind of go back, and I'm in as actually an AP administrator role center, and I have the payables agent details here. I'm going to show one here. There's a couple that were processed. Let's just show this one here as an example. Maybe I'll open this up a little bit. We'll go and we'll specifically look at it. This is the document that the agent processed, received it by email. And you can see worldwide importers, or wide world importers, sorry. You can see the invoice number, 246, the due date, the document date. This is the document that was processed by the agent with all of that detail, perfectly processed, wide world importers. And here's the two lines that I want to focus on. So if you see here, the two lines in the invoice that was sent to the agent is SGH001 and PGH001. These are vendor item references. Now, the system recognized that. Payables agent singled them out. These are the item reference numbers against our item number in Business Central. Just to validate, whenever you see these little eye icons, this is the suggestion that the payables agent, in this case, has proposed. And just to validate, we'll go ahead and click on it, and sure enough, the referenced SGH001 is GRH in our system. Same with the PGH, it's GRH in our system, and you can see that in the second line as well. So really straightforward, everything's matched up, but you always validate. We can scroll across, just make sure that the quantities, the unit prices, the totals match out, and they do. So this one was processed. That's one example. Let's go back. And if you look at my payables agent icon, you can see here that there's one that I have to pay attention to, and that's the one that we just emailed to the system. So I'm going to click on it. And this is that human in the loop pane that you'll see across all agents. And what this is telling me is that I have something that I need to pay attention to, and it's to review the one that we just sent. So I'm going to click on that. We're going to review it. And so just so you can see here, this is the PDF that I'd sent it. You recall yearly license fees. There's a quantity of 6. Graphic Design Institute, again, if we looked at the numbers, the actual invoice numbers, everything kind of matches up here, including, of course, the vendor. And of note, this info suggestion, what the system has said is, okay, we think that we should be posting against the GL account 68210. So I want to validate that. If I click on this, sure enough, it's for license fees. It's exactly what we want to post this against. If it made a mistake or guessed wrong, and you make the correction, finalize the draft, it will remember the next time what you decided upon for that. So it learns as you go. And all I have to do is click continue. If I'm happy with this, I'm happy. It's gone ahead, processed that document in the system to be later actually posted and paid on. So that's all that I wanted to show on the Payables agent, Aaron. I hope that I showed that it'll actually go and process the invoice details, classifies the lines against that, and significantly allows your existing finance team to scale without increasing headcount if there's increase in activity.
Excellent. Thanks, Brennan. Give me a second. I'll get the PowerPoint back going. All right. Let's shift gears and get into the sales order agent now. So we saw it from a payable side of things. Let's look at a sales side. This one is a little bit more complex, and so I think it's got some new elements of AI that'll be interesting to you as you kind of walk through. The use case for this one specifically is trying to resolve a few different things when it comes to organizations that have high volume of sales order entry. Ultimately, that high volume is time consuming to re-enter invoices or enter orders based on customer customer requests. Obviously, you're doing a lot of that data entry, just like you had on the payables agent. Anytime you're re-entering information, there's a chance that you could make an error. So it's trying to eliminate those. It will also, over and above what payables agent does, it is an agent that the customer interacts with using natural language. So there is some back and forth that we see this agent taking care of in terms of communication with the customer to confirm and validate the information or the order that they're ultimately asking for us to then deliver. The agent will even engage with more complex functionality within Business Central, like capable and available to promise, so that we're setting the right expectation with the customers, again, without having to involve a human in the middle of that. And so a lot of what we see in terms of benefit out of the agents is that ability to take the workload out of that sales order entry team so that it is entered automatically. We eliminate all errors that go into the data entry. We also take care of the basic level of interactions with the customer from the perspective of clarification. We take all that work away from the individual, and it's not just one email then creates a sales order. There's a fair bit of back and forth that the agent can conduct on your behalf with that customer in order to kind of hone in the right order. And at that point, kind of see how it ultimately takes this information and then processes it. So ultimately receives an email, typically from a customer, which is just going to be in natural language. It's not an official document coming in. It's a request. There's still the checking and security checks in and around the validity of that email. It will do some initial checking for things like inventory levels. Are we transacting in the right unit of measure? Have we got the right attributes and variants assigned for what the customer is ultimately looking for? We can trigger this agent just at any time. So basically, it triggers upon the receipt of an email. They'll then go through that interaction with the customer, ultimately resulting in the creation of. Typically, I think it starts with a quote with specific pricing that's related to that specific customer. So it's not blindly creating stock sales orders and quotes. It is actually entering and coming up with a pricing that's specific to the customer that it is interacting with. Just like the payables agent, it has a predefined role with predefined permissions that it's not allowed to go outside the boundaries of. One quick note is, and I think I mentioned it later, that those permissions are also limited by the user internally that is interacting with that agent as well. So there's kind of multiple layers of permissions and security on top of these agents. It will draft and write emails to send back to customers. Depending on your configuration, it can bring the individual, the human, into the fold in order to validate what it is coming up with in terms of what it's sending back to customers, both from a language perspective as well as an accuracy perspective on the sales order or the quote. And then it would ultimately convert that quote into an order upon customer confirming that the order is good to go. So, Brendan, I'll send back to you to walk everybody through this process here.
All right. Good here. Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'm going to hover over my sales order agent icon. Right off the bat, you'll notice it's paused. You have full control. You turn them on and off when you want to, when there's peak periods, for example. And so I've paused this one, but even so, it's showing me, again, KPIs, very specific to sales. It will determine when it receives emails whether or not they are sales related, and then whether or not to act on them. So that's kind of neat. This is, I've created one order and one quote through this sales order agent with a human in the loop. but it's even summing up the amount of order dollar volume that it's done so far. So I think what I want to do is kind of show a little bit of what Aaron was talking about with the setup of this, because there's a few more options here, not many, but there's a few more options versus the payables agent. Certainly there's a shared email box that you can assign it, if you will. Manage user access, just like with the payables agent, you can have multiple account managers or salespeople or sales managers that get to monitor and that human in the loop task pane, if you will. But here's some interesting setups. As Aaron mentioned, you can set up how it responds to your existing registered customers that are in Business Central in the system, whether it's all the emails or a few, or there's some other advanced options there as well, and whether or not to even respond to unregistered senders, if you will. And then Aaron had mentioned, I think, a cable to promise, you can select whether or not it only provides quotes for in-stock available items or in-stock available items that may be not in stock, I'm sorry, now, but they will be in a week because there's a purchase coming in a few days. And then on the level of autonomy, you can have it fully automate the sales quote generation to these customers and prospects, potentially. And the same on the sales order side. And of course, depending on your use case, you'll want to kind of monitor this and see. But for example, rather than always validating against the quotes and the orders, you could autonomously let the sales order agent respond and provide quotes, and then validates that the orders are done properly before they're sent out to the customer. And then finally, you can limit, in terms of spam, a daily limit of 100 emails or whatever you want to put in here. It will analyze PDFs of purchase orders, for example, or images, and you can kind of personalize the email signature of your sales order agent. So let's go and show an example of this. So I'm just going to go in here as one of my customers, Peter. And so what Peter did, he's with a datum. He's asked for a quote in the body of the email, but it could have been a purchase order PDF attached. I'd like a quote for 5 Athens desks and 20 Berlin chairs. In the system, we're an office furniture distributor. And so with or without validation, in this case, I did validate, but with the click of a button, the reply with a sales quote was, thank you for your interest. Please find below a summary, and it's created that summary. I didn't do anything here. The sales order agent did all this in terms of the content of the email, including a discount. So I'll show you where that discount came from. And what I think is kind of neat, there's a nice soft close here asking whether or not to convert this to an order. Let me show you the quote. Let's do a preview. And if you can see this, it's kind of small, but a Datum Corporation, when they purchase 5 or more Athens desks, they get a 10% discount. So Business Central, it's set up in the system, and the order agent included this in the quote. So I validated all this, it looks perfect. And in fact, the customer replied and said, yes, looks good, I confirm the order. Please send this to our main address on file. Now, in Business Central, there's 3 or 4 different addresses that a datum has. So again, I validated with one click that the order was correct in terms of the order confirmation. But my sales order agent replied, thank you for confirmation. Order's been processed and will be shipped to your main address on file. So it actually confirmed that. And that ends the process of that. So essentially, you can almost completely autonomize this, but it significantly automates the quote and order intake process. Drafts orders for rapid approval, one click if you want to do that, which I suggest that you would. but a huge increase in, I'll say, quote capacity and revenue lift with your existing team, especially during peak periods when you want to turn this on or off.
Excellent. Let me switch back to PowerPoint. We'll get to the last little bit of our presentation today, which is, in my opinion, the most exciting part of it. So the agent designer. So the payables agent and sales order agent are I think, great great agents to be able to use. But I lost my internet connection there. Apologies. I was saying that the agent designer, I think, is really an interesting addition to the agentic offering from Microsoft. So well, the sales order agent and the payables agent are great, but let's go through the agent designer sort of process and the feedback that we can kind of give you in and around how you would create your own agent. So the first thing that you would do is, ultimately, when you're creating a new agent, you assign a profile to that agent. We talked about that a little bit earlier, in that it's predefined, but we want to get up into Business Central and we want to give it effectively some security permissions. Remembering, though, that the individual that this agent will be attached to will ultimately also adopt any permissions that user has as well. And so, but it's good, best practice ultimately to give your agent its own specific permissions as well. When you're creating effectively the instructions, you can use natural language to describe what it is you want your agent to ultimately do. The advice that Microsoft has on this is, do so as concisely as possible and continue to refine and refine and refine that language as you kind of go through the process of building that agent. So you can always go back and update your instructions, which is really the key to how it all works. That's the natural language instructions. It also recommends that when you build those instructions, you use a hierarchy, like almost like indented bullets, in order to make sure that the agent has sort of a step-by-step instruction list. It also recommends that you prompt your agent with a role that it plays in the business so that it knows how to act. So you describe your agent in the instructions as, well, whatever it may be, but it's basically a description of the job that it's ultimately doing. Your prompt that you're writing ultimately is really a subset of a larger Microsoft prompt that is governing things like compliance, that you're not doing anything illegal. It's also protecting you from things like security threats, like prompt insertion attacks that could be trying to take over your agent to do something. So you've got your portion of the build, which is then supplemented behind the scenes with what Microsoft is doing. Those instructions that you write in your in the instructions for the agent, that then get converted to a list of tasks and steps for the agent that you're allowed to then step through when you process or test out your agent. Those tasks and steps can be then specifically modified and refined in order to fine-tune how the agent ultimately works. But if you were to ask Microsoft or us, what is the most important? The most important is to get the instructions right. The tasks and steps are really more for fine-tuning what you want that agent to do. As you kind of walk through examples that you feed your agent, you can tweak those tasks and steps. And then as you also walk through step by step, you can see how Microsoft is consuming, or your agent is consuming, credits. So Brendan mentioned earlier, 1 credit equals roughly 1 US cent. You can kind of see the cost of your agent that is accumulating as it processes a single case. And so what you can do is you can get more efficient in your instructions as well as your steps in order to kind of minimize those Copilot credits that you are using, or that the system will use when it goes live. It will also monitor with memory the actions that were performed, that the agent performed on a case-by-case basis, as well as the searches that it executed. And then the interaction tools that you've got available to you to engage with individuals outside of the agent, so real humans in your business or outside of, are user intervention interaction, which is I need the user to help me finish this process. User review, which is, of course, I've done this, please make sure that it is okay. And then the response action, which is effectively communication with typically an outside party. So creation of an email or a chat or whatever it may be. And then finally, we would recommend that as you train this agent as you are also testing it. So when it creates a document, whether that's a sales order or a quote or a purchase order, requisition or an inventory update or whatnot, it will denote, as Brendan showed, I think in the Payables agent demo, with a little eye and a circle around it, that data very specifically was created by the agent. And so you can hover over it so that it'll give you the rationale for why it created what it created. But if you give that either the thumbs up or the thumbs down, it doesn't have a lot of feelings yet. And so it's rather important to give it that positive reinforcement or tell it that it is incorrect, because that will then, that feedback will then make its way into the next iteration of that process. So that the more you give it feedback, the better the next process ultimately is. The last thing I'll just note is that link at the very bottom of the screen is to the Microsoft Learn site, and it's very actively being updated, mostly in and around the most important part of this entire process if you're building your own agents, which is getting these instructions correct. So I would encourage you, if you want to experiment with creating your own agents, that you take a look at that link. And before I lose connection again, we better pass over to you, Brendan. Apologies for that.
All right. You only cut out a little bit there. It's all good. Okay, very exciting. We've got 9.5 minutes. That's just enough time, I think. So let's see where we can get to. Okay, so create or design your own agent. Really exciting. It's been out for 10 days, I think. You might have mentioned, Aaron. I've got a couple of examples. There's a templated example that Microsoft has shipped the agent designer with, and it's a sales validation one. So we're going to look at this right away, actually, so that I can kind of walk through a lot of what Aaron had already spoken about. We've shown some of this, including the setting up a profile, managing permissions. But in this case, similar to Copilot Studio, if you're familiar with that, which has a few more tools and tweaking of different LLMs that you can kind of run, there's specific instructions that you assign, set up for your agent. And you can see here, this is similar to what Aaron was talking about in terms of how you set up those instructions in natural language. And if I kind of scroll down a little bit more here, it's actually showing, you kind of select a task. This is the last task, and it's showing, in this case, 12 steps that it went through. This sales validation agent, when you put an input of a shipment date in it, maybe I'll show that, which I did this, I've got an old work date in my system, but I said, okay, process reserved. It's going to take these items that are ready to ship, that are reserved and in stock, and release those sales orders to the warehouse on this date. So this is what it did, is it actually went and managed that and then sent me a review of exactly what it did. I only put one system in the one order in the system for it to be able to release, but that's what it did. So very specific. The instructions, if we go back quickly to this and I show you an example, because we've got a few minutes here. This is a little bit about what Aaron was talking about. It's step by step. What did the agent decide? What the agent saw, just the code. the tools the agent had access to. I think Aaron had mentioned some of those tools as well, and even what was memorized so that it could do its job, its task. So really quite detailed. And as Aaron had mentioned, with those instructions, you can go back iteratively to previous history of instructions, tweak it, go send it again. The whole idea is this is helping you create a proof of concept. Okay, I'll show you an example that I created to do a little testing. It's a project assistant. And what this project assistant is doing, if I click on the input, and this is a timeline of, I'll go through this step by step. I've got time. The input that I had to provide this, it's going to go and create a project with phases and tasks in Business Central based on the previous history for this customer and how we've set up projects before and the description that I give, as well as a start date and who the project manager should be. So the message that I gave it, the input, was to create a project for the School of Fine Art to remodel their number 3 boardroom. Start date should be September 1st. Choose a project manager that makes sense. So we'll go through step by step so I can show you exactly the reasoning behind this agent. There's those info suggestions. Remodel number 3 boardroom, School of Fine Art, it's picked all that. What's really of interest though is the next step, it actually created, if I scroll down, phases and tasks against those phases, so a WBS for this project in Business Central, and it's giving you reasoning behind each of those phases. It's taking into account the previous projects for the School of Fine Art. What I found interesting was this particular task, AVIT installation, that wasn't in a previous project. So the agent just decided that might be a good task to add, which I would agree. But the whole idea is you validate against this. And then the next step was we set up the agent to provide a summary, project number, it's now in Business Central, the start dates, the project manager, and the WBS that it created. That's one example around project services, so very operational. I have another example that I'll show here. We've got a few minutes left. I'm in a different demo environment here, but I created this one here. It's a consumed materials distributor. I'll go through steps with this one as well. The input for this was, in this example, when we have a sales order set up with make to order finished goods that we send to the shop floor, when they're finished consuming and creating those finished goods, they send us a total list of, I'll say, effort and actual raw materials that it consumed. And so this is what happened. If I show you the attachment, our shop floor had a total consumption of both effort as well as bill of materials that included different units of materials. But of course, the finished goods, they all use the same one. So in the instructions, it's I provided them with a specific allocation against these specific finished goods. And just to give you an idea, I'll quickly show the sales order it's referring to, which is 1092. There's 2 different lines here, 2 different products, a full panel and a half panel. These are make to order in this example. There is no bill of materials. There's no assembly BOM associated. My agent's going to create that for me with my validation. And so if we go to the next step here, it created a wall panel, bill of materials, assembly BOM with the resources and the items, the bill of materials. For the full panel, it did it for the half panel as well. And it also gave me a summary of exactly what it's consuming in each of those lines, if you will, those finished goods. And I decide whether to go back, tweak those bills of materials against those lines. If I click continue, it just finishes that and associates these bill of materials with that sales order. So really that's all that I was going to show. I think we've got a minute and a half left, but I hope what these examples show is even on operational, not just back office, we can really automate full workflows with a human in the loop to validate, make sure that we're happy with the way things are going. And that would significantly add and boost productivity with your existing team of FTEs so they can go out and add more value where it makes sense.
Great examples, Brennan. So hopefully we've given you guys some great ideas in and around how you can use agents within your business.